Thank you for joining us today and welcome to Louis Lessons, a virtual conversation concert series featuring esteemed pianist, raconteur, and KCH favorite, Louis Nagel. This series has been generously funded by seasoned underwriters Maurice and Linda Binkow. This presentation is free, but please consider supporting our world-class artists and our Kerrytown Concert House by making your own gift at kerrytownconcerthouse.com/donate. Enjoy the program.
Hello, everybody. Thank you for tuning in. I'm awfully happy to be here, as I always am happy to be at Kerrytown, my favorite place to play, my favorite place to listen to music. And I'm sure everyone who knows me knows how much I love being here and how much I love to support this concert hall. I have been asked the question several times, both by students in the course of my career as a teacher and by friends who have heard me talk about music, why do you bother to analyze a piece of music? What's the point of that? The composer has written the notes, and after the music of Bach, composers tended to put in some verbal expressive gesture like F for forte or P for piano, or articulations like the little phrase lines, that slurs, there's a misnomer, or staccatos. And other things, even some composers, occasionally Beethoven, put in fingerings. Why bother to analyze? Just do what the music says and you'll be fine. And the short answer to that is you're right. Play what the composer wrote. But then, what really did the composer write? Before I even get into the details, I want to give you an example of something that is very puzzling. I'm going to be talking today about the Pathéthique Sonata, and I chose that because I'm assuming that many people are familiar with it, and many people who have studied the piano want to play this piece. And of course, the beginning is wonderful. It's glorious. You get to play those big, wow, look at me. It's a wonderful sound. Here's what Beethoven wrote. You can't see it on the page, but under the first notes, the chord, that big, wonderful chord, he writes F forte immediately juxtaposed to the instruction P. Now, how the devil do you do that on the piano? Well, for years when I would play this piece, I tried. Not only is it risky, but I've concluded that it really doesn't work. Some editions will have forte and then the next sound marked piano. It's inevitable, the note's going to decay. And some editions have forte diminuendo piano. So that's 3 different instructions just about the first chord. So what does that mean? There are so many questions that come up. Now, just for an analogy, you have a stomach ache, so you go to the doctor. And you figure the doctor is going to fix you. But in order for the doctor to do a really good job, the doctor has to know everything in the way of just a little upset stomach from having too many spare ribs the day before, or something very, very serious. And with a few questions, we can narrow it down. But the doctor really does have to know something about the anatomy of the stomach, the digestive system, in order to be responsible in prescribing medicine. I'm sure you understand the analogy here. I need to understand those instructions in order to do something to teach myself something about how to play this famous and beloved opening. And actually, I have been wrestling with this all my life because that forte and then release some sound, but not all, is so unreliable. I've done that in public, but it's not reliable. And the one time I did this, very embarrassing. Don't try it at home. Very, very embarrassing. So that's just a little something. The larger question is, does analysis actually help you interpret something other than a spot? What I'm going to do today is to talk about this sonata, focusing more on the first movement, but not eliminating the second and third movement too, and then I'm going to play it for you. So I want to talk about that opening line, and I'm going to be playing excerpts so you can hear what I'm talking about. The opening again. You have a scale rising 3 notes and then coming back. The scale continues 3 notes. And listen to that chord. Stab of pain. Octave higher, the same 3 notes, but a different rhythm. More insistent, going to this. So essentially what we have here is music that starts from the note C and goes up to A flat, which in reducing it is the interval of a sixth. Now, you don't need to know that when you're listening to someone play this piece. But I need to know the direction of this opening. I need to feel where the music is going, because the next thing that happens is the polar opposite of that build-up. All of that build-up gets tumbling down in the scale. So we have 2 elements here. We have rising notes by thirds, the interval is 6, rising scale followed by a falling scale. Now, you would say perhaps, yeah, every piece of music has something like that, and that's true. And every architect that builds a building uses brick or wood or metal or plastic or vinyl or whatever material. All of those materials will be common to the architecture of a piece, but how they are used lends to the individuality of the piece, the personal statement of each piece, and it's up to the performer to probe that. This is why analysis, understanding more than just tonic chord, 7, 7 to 5, 5. You don't care about that. And I promise you that when I play this, I'm not thinking 7, 7 to 5. By the time I do that, I'm in the next phrase. So you don't think concretely of analysis. But I said that chord is a bit of a stab. Here's the other one. It's an appoggiatura chord to a 1-6-3. All right, that gets me 100 on an exam. But I've got to feel. Notes. I've got to feel that intensity. It's more intense. I have to feel it. So I have to shape this rising phrase. I have to feel that in my own spirit to be able to play that with some degree of expressivity. I think it would be appropriate to read at this point something from a book that's one of the 2 greatest books that I know of about Beethoven, and there are many. Jan Swafford's biography of Beethoven is stupendous. Louis Lockwood's writing on Beethoven is stupendous. But this book, The Beethoven Sonatas, and the creative experience. And I'm going to drop a name because he's a dear friend, and I think he's one of the greatest musicians that I know, Kenneth Drake. Just a scholar, wonderful man, great scholar. And he's gone through all the Beethoven sonatas from this very standpoint that I'm talking about today, from creative experience, both from Beethoven's point and from the performer's point. Let me read to you a kind of a longish paragraph that's going to further set the stage for what we're going to do today. The phrase familiarity breeds contempt unfortunately applies to works such as the Pathéthique, whose very popularity conceals their individuality. Real familiarity raises questions that challenge the security of a pedantic concept of performance. Merely, and this is key, merely identifying the motives has no purpose except for academic analysis. Only when such study shapes interpretation by revealing what is interpretively significant is real familiarity achieved. More, but I want to stop there because I want to go on this introduction and talk about what is really significant to me. We've talked about the rising scale of the sixth interval and the falling, tumbling down, cascading through that scale. We end up in E-flat major, having started in C minor. Well, they're very closely related. They have the same key signature. But there is such a difference from this opening and then hearing this. That jagged French overture gesture of the beginning is now somewhat mollified and somewhat tamed. And it's in a major key. And it's got a moving left hand, a pulsating left hand. It's a totally different mood of the same music. But it doesn't last. There's going to be an interruption. I'll play it for you. The chords are getting more intense. Feel the intensity building? Way apart on the keyboard. It's like taking a rubber band and pulling it until it's just going to break. It's all a rising scale. And it's the conflict between the beautiful, calm, peaceful E-flat major and the French overture, angular and belligerent C minor music. This is Beethoven already developing an idea here in the introduction of the piece. Or some people would say this is the first theme. We can argue that terminology later. Here is how music is building. It is really up to the performer to feel the growth and the spread and the intensification of the music and shape it dynamically so that you don't play too loud at the beginning. You have somewhere to grow, that you feel where the theme gets to the top of the climax of the line, and then be able to come down. This becomes almost a little bit like a recitative in an opera. We call that a deceptive cadence. You would think that was going to do this. But that brings to it an end to it. This is not an end. Yes? Are you going to go on? How long do I have to wait? Where's the harmony? Where's the rhythm? What's going to happen? Here's that scale again. And I'm not going to finish it just yet. You all know what's coming. But do you feel the mystery? Do you feel the intensity? Do you feel the power of that opening from a more analytical standpoint than just it's fun to play? This is what I believe I have to know. This is what I want to impart to a student. And this is what I would want to communicate to an audience, in whatever words the audience would receive. So that is one way analysis translates into performance. I want to finish that paragraph because I think Kenneth Drake wrote so beautifully about it. It is the unnatural and the bizarre, principally in the dynamic exaggeration, that moves us, so that we empathize with being overpowered and ruled by the force of feelings that lead us to irrational acts. Each time we compromise by subduing the assault of a subito, that means sudden, dynamic, or attenuating the breadth of a crescendo, or narrowing the extremes of a pianissimo or a fortissimo, or the extremes of time, to avoid marring a beautiful work of art. It's a long sentence, but every time we compromise those gestures, we diminish its kinship with the reality of life. And I've read that sentence over and over and over again. It just penetrates to my very being. Beethoven did not free music. Mozart is infinitely freer in that he does not need to depend on dynamic exaggeration, visceral force, to make the structure of a piece believable. The interpreter of a Beethoven sonata, on the contrary, is forced constantly to look into the face of life as it's lived in the sonata and ask in all insecurity, is this your true likeness? Now, I know that some of that writing is metaphorical and some of it is high flown, but it means so much to me to hear somebody who I respect so much write those words and articulate something that I feel as an interpreter of any piece of music, whether it's a simple little Schumann piece, or whether it's a very, very complicated Beethoven sonata, or Schoenberg Opus 11 that I've had the pleasure of playing and had to do the same thing. Where is the music going and what needs to be shown in order to make this music live for me and for the performer? Let's go on a little bit with the rest of the sonata movement and see how those elements that we talked about get played out. This is also my practice time, by the way. You know that by the way, for pianists, sonata, that little bird's eye thing that you put over a note, which means to hold it, is over a dotted 16th. It's not over a half. You don't want to do. So how you doing? Everything okay? Oh, I guess I better play. It's not. That A flat is so important. That A flat is not an accident. That's a structural element of the piece, and it's going to finally resolve to the tonic, and now we're going to have the rising and falling scale. That's a tune, not really very singable. A nuisance with the left hand, by the way. But it's based on the opening. Very clearly based on the opening. Both the rising scale stuff and the rise and fall, particularly. And by nature of its so contrasting, somewhat in agreement with the idea of E minor and E flat juxtaposition. Now, just a word about Beethoven in general. What we're seeing in this sonata, and this is a revolutionary piece, nothing that I know of has been done in the repertoire before this, with this big French overture, gesture, and opening page, setting the stage, and then with a few motives, a few ideas, making not just a movement, but an entire sonata. This pervades the entire Appassionata. This pervades the entire Waldstein sonata. I mean, all the big sonatas come out of a few motives. Just another example. Waldstein. What is it? Every one of you could have written that. Nothing. But what happens to the second theme? That's just one example that goes through. And at the very end, the famous octave glissandos. Yeah, it's written that way. On Beethoven's piano, it was a lot easier to do. But it's a descending scale. He could get more juice out of a lemon, but really wonderful juice, not bitter juice. And he does this through all of the sonatas. Needless to say, becomes he never loses a motive. He always uses it. And realizing this demands that the performer look for ways to feel the unity of a piece. I don't think of the Pathéthique. I don't think of the Moonlight. I don't think of the Appassionata, pieces that I have played quite often, as 3 or 4 or 2 movements. I think of it as a piece, and how a movement or an idea will grow and evolve. Like a human being can be a baby at first and will grow into a mature, we hope mature, always in Beethoven mature, less often in human beings, but the idea that it grows into something that's fully realized. And the performer has to feel the direction and feel the impact, the process of evolving through a Beethoven sonata. This is why we analyze. We want to find out that process. We don't necessarily want to give these questions on an exam so that the students can get 100. We want to relate it to what we do as performers. Back to the sonata specifically, we get this really annoying passage. Why Beethoven wrote it this way, I don't know. It's a nuisance. And what the hand crossing is maybe he was showing off he was the greatest pianist of his time. And even though he's beginning to realize in 1798 when he composed this that there's something wrong with his hearing, he's still perfectly capable of playing the piano in public and promoting himself as a performer. So he's maybe bringing in some virtuosity. That is very, very hard. And accuracy, well, we'll hope for it. But the point is, listen to what the interval is. sixths. Doesn't sound like it comes from the same thing, but it's the same interval. The music is encompassed in the same interval. And what's even more amazing is that here is a C minor piece that's going not to E flat that was set up at the beginning, but to E flat minor. Now, those of you who don't really care about this aren't going to find this amazing. But to go to the relative major minor for a second theme is unusual. He does this again in the Appassionata. It's unusual not to follow the prescribed treatment of going from minor to relative major. We go first to the relative minor, possibly because he's already anticipated the relative major in the opening. But that opening, that second theme is important in this movement because of the relationship to the opening interval. I'm going to jump the gun and show you that he comes back to it. How dry I am, if you want to authorize it. It's amazing. And this is something, I had played the sonata for decades before I realized that. And when I did, it made the piece feel unified. Like after that gorgeous, gorgeous second movement, which is something of a respite from this kind of unity, it comes back and he's using the same. I didn't get enough out of that sixth and the rising third. I didn't get enough out of it. There's more to be said about those elements. It's like building a new room with the same brick onto the house. It's so wonderful to see how this coalesces at the end, in the last movement. And I'm not going to jump the gun further because some of this I want you to be able to hear and maybe think yourselves how you've heard this same material before. But it will unify a piece of and take it beyond the or it's fun or I like to hear it or I've recognized that. That's great. Nothing wrong with that. But we need as performers to have that same understanding of the piece as your gastroenterologist has of your stomach. So going on, I probably could have come up with a better analogy than that. Forgive me if it's a problem. Then we have a closing theme gesture section that is clearly in E flat major and is based very much on the scale. Back to the beginning. And now, the last thing I'm going to say about interpretive is where do we go back? There is no double bar sign at the beginning of urtext considered editions. He didn't write one. At least we don't know that there is one. So do we go back to there's compelling argument. One of my dear colleagues, Stefano Mangozzi, and I are still looking forward to a conversation about this. We're on opposite sides of the aisle, but his argument is I respect him so much. It's a compelling argument. My argument against it is, you'll hear it when I play it. I don't go back. I go back to the Allegro di molto, to that and repeat it. And the reason I don't do it is because twice more in the movement we hear the music stop and we go back to the French overture gesture, which is radical. a word that is not particularly popular today, but it is a radical thing to do. This was not done. Once the sonata started, you went on. You didn't go back to an introductory gesture. So, the development is very brief, and the recapitulation, the coming back, opening material, does much the same thing as the exposition. I don't want to give it all away. There are a few surprises, key changes, but it's fairly standard. But just the end. What really should happen, let me play the end badly. That would have been good. That would have been fine. Clementi would have done that. And we'd be playing that sonata of Clementi. But what does Beethoven do? I think you probably know if you've heard the piece. I'm not going to show it to you until you hear it. But Beethoven does something that is so marvelous and so radical for its time. Quickly, the second and third movements. They're just as wonderful, but I want to spend a little bit more time, and then I want you to hear the piece. Because whatever you say about a piece of music, it's not important until you hear it. And when you are a performer, it's not important until you play it and hear it. So you can talk about music until you're blue in the face. But it means nothing unless there is a realized, heard sound, and then you in the audience can decide whether it was satisfying to you, because some of these issues that I've talked about have been at least included in your thinking, in the performer's thinking, or whether performer happens to be a good friend of mine and I, pat him on the head. Nice try, buddy. Nice. That's up to you. But it's up to the performer to use this analysis and get a sound that is justifiable. Second movement. We all know this. Those of us who remember Karl Haas know this movement particularly well. The key is not unusual, A flat major, but maybe it's more than just coincidence. Maybe his inner ear told him that the second movement being this key it's pretty, but it's not the right tessitura. It that wonderful burnished baritone sound for the piano, and it also takes advantage of the fact that that opening motive outlined that sixth. So now we're going to have a gorgeous movement, one of the most beautiful that Beethoven ever wrote, in the key of A flat, which is the sixth above or the third below C and C minor. Maybe instinctive with Beethoven. Who knows? Who knows? But it's there. And then some very beautiful music. Beethoven is often, he's not often called beautiful. That's beautiful. That's beautiful. Everybody, everybody knows that. He could write beautiful music. The second movement of the Fifth Symphony is beautiful. The second movement of the Second Symphony something like that. It's approximation. That's beautiful. It's one of the most beautiful movements that he wrote. But he's much more associated with the drama and with the aforementioned kind of building of music, the conflicts it creates in sound, the tensions and releases, and the sudden dynamic changes. A movement that has relatively few dynamic subitos, and it's just full singable music. Then it moves up into the soprano range, and this could easily be sung. And maybe after this program is over, some of you will be reminiscing about Karl Haas's opening for his program and singing this tune. It's quite beautiful. In the middle of the piece, something wonderful happens. Talking about keys for just a moment. A-flat major is a very common key in Beethoven. And when he uses it, he often goes to A-flat minor. Now, for those of you who don't read music, A-flat minor has 7 flats. For those of you who do read music, A-flat minor has 7 flats. And it can be somewhat tricky to read. It was not a key that was readable and used very often. If that key was used, it might show up a little easier to read as G sharp minor. But there's a difference to a trained ear, even on the piano. A-flat minor is a darker, more velvety key than G sharp minor. And you have this veiled sound. It's a wonderful, wonderful touch. It goes quickly into E major, or F flat major if you want to really be theoretically correct about it. But it's this darkening of the tonal scheme that is so wonderful in this movement. And then it comes back very peacefully to the in triplets now. So the form, it's a kind of a petit rondo form, excuse me, relatively simple in form, and a respite from the turbulence of the first movement. Then comes that revisiting of the second theme of the first movement as the first theme of the last movement, the rondo. Sorry about the E natural in there. Humanity showed its face there. But do you hear how that theme takes on a whole new importance? Now it's a first theme, and it grows from here to, again, there's this rising feeling. The last movement, again, the idea. Now it's an arpeggio that rises and falls. It's a seventh. I had an analysis teacher at Juilliard that used to love to say, yeah, well, it's only one more than a sixth. And he would try to fit that into to make the relationship obvious to us. I never bought it. But the rising, falling. And then we get a touch of that E flat minor that we had in the first movement. So there are elements in the last movement that reflect and revisit elements in the first movement, even as he is going in a new direction. A middle section. Sounds like he's going to write a double fugue. He doesn't. It's not long before he's going to do that in the sonatas, but we haven't quite gotten to the fugues yet. But it's very contrapuntal instead of that kind of left hand. And there's invertible counterpoint. What's in the left hand is in the right hand. So we're going in a new direction and new excitement. I think all of you know this piece in some way or another. It is perhaps the most, along with the Moonlight, the most popular of the Beethoven sonatas. And along with the Appassionata, the Waldstein, I guess those four, maybe for me the Tempest is right up there with that, are Beethoven's most popular and most honored pieces. And they certainly are the most beautiful at times, where he is really talking about beauty. Wonderful, harmonious sounds that sometimes you'd think you'd be listening to a Schubert sonata. Once in a while, it even sounds like Mendelssohn. But we never, ever lose the imprint of Ludwig von Beethoven, who was able to take little bits of music and unify them into big sonatas. And again, in closing, just to let you know the importance that I feel that everything a performer, whether it's a pianist or a singer or a conductor or a timpanist, whatever the musical instrument is, the manifestation of that music, the sound, needs to be studied. And when you think about it this way, and when you realize that it took me decades before I realized was this, and I'd played it since I was a kid, and nobody showed me that, you realize that there's always something that one can learn in the revisiting of an old piece or the taking up of a new piece from the standpoint of analyzing and studying it. That's why, for whomever asked me that question, there's several people, that's why I think analysis is so important. It does not replace performance, but it certainly enhances the performance you give. Why don't we hear the piece now? just one little self-serving comment. I can't remember enjoying playing a piece of music quite so much as I did just now. Partly, thank you, Maury and Linda, for coming, and Abby for being here. It's nice to be able to play for some friends quite distanced. Nevertheless, I feel very close. And it's nice to know that I have some way of communicating music in this wonderful place. I do want to do one thing before I say goodbye. You'll recognize it and you'll know why I'm playing it.
Thank you for joining us for Live at the 415. Don't forget to sign up for our newsletter to read about upcoming live streamed concerts and subscribe to our YouTube channel to be notified about our newest videos and upcoming live streams. Have a good evening.